Morning, everybody. So here I am again, my favorite day of the week, my writing Fridays, and I'm just out and about really early, seeing people taking their dogs for a walk, and here I am taking the writer for a little walk before I go and sit down and bring my attention into what I need to create today. And so today I'm going to start thinking, not that I haven't started thinking about it, obviously, because once you start writing something, you're always thinking about the character that you've created. And today I'm going to start looking at the stories that belong to the character before the story begins. We know that when a story begins, it's usually in the middle of something that is happening to a character. We always say that you should start your story with action, something's happening. And that's really what gets our readers hooked in to the drama of the moment. But the important thing, so the character's going to have a problem, or your character's always going to be confronted with some sort of big thing in the beginning, this, what we sometimes talk about, the inciting event, this moment where the character begins the story. But before our characters get into the story, they've already got problems. They've got a lot of problems, and it's not like the story gives them their problems. The story makes their problems worse. So the important thing for us to do is to really understand what our characters' problems are before they actually step into the story. And those problems are manifested and often taught, like your character has to start the story with a very strong desire, wanting something that they cannot have, that there are obstacles to them getting what they want. They should fear something, and all of these things need to be evident from the beginning so that we have a strong sense of our character's motivation and what they're doing inside the story, and how the plot is going to now help them to navigate all the problems that are going to ensue from wanting this thing that they cannot have and from fearing something, which are normally very tied up together. But the thing is that a character's wants, what your character wants, is always going to be sourced in something that has happened in the past. It doesn't happen on page one, that the character kind of maybe wakes up and decides that they want something that they've never thought of before. It's normally something that a character's wanted for a long time. The fear is normally something that has been with them for a very long time. And all of that is sourced. It gives our character, they need to want something, so there's got to be what they want, and then there's got to be something that, there's got to be a reason for why they want what they want, right? So the what and the why, their motivation and all of that, we've got to really understand that before we can just kick off with the writing. So that's why, I spend a lot of time thinking about this character before I just kind of jump in and write, because everything the character says and does, and, whatever the character does and their behavior, their reaction to things, all going to be, related to all of the stuff, what they want, what they can't have, why they want it. And all of that is rooted in this thing called backstory, this whole kind of story that happens before our story kicks off, before we sort of throw them in the middle of something. So in my case, I'm dealing with this mother of a teenage daughter, and the daughter has just gone through this awful tragedy 6 months ago, and the mother is now desperate. As a mother, she's desperately trying to protect her daughter from pain and suffering. But of course, it's too late, right? It's happened already. She can't go back. She can't protect the daughter. This thing has already happened. And so the mother is in this frantic state of now trying to stop her daughter from disappearing into this tragic experience. She's watching her daughter literally disappear. The daughter doesn't have an appetite. She's depressed. She's become... She can't feel her daughter there anymore when she sort of reaches out. She feels her disappearing. So this makes even more frantic for her. So this idea that she's going to now take her away to this romantic place, she's going to take her to Italy, she's going to feed her, she'll get her appetite back, they'll connect, it'll be a mother-daughter thing, it'll be new sights, it'll be handsome Italian men or whatever it is. The whole romance of Italy, this is her idea. This is what she's going to do to fix this situation. Now, of course, this is a setup, right? As a writer, you're setting her up for... That's not going to happen, right? It's never going to happen. If that's what happens, there's no story, right? There's nothing going on there. So she's desperate now to connect with her. The question, of course, now is, where does this... The obvious, thing, all mothers want to protect their children from suffering. I think that's a very basic human need that we can all relate to. If we have people we love, we obviously don't want them to suffer. What do you do, though, when somebody that you love desperately, it has already suffered. It's done. You and the mother, by the way, saw it coming. She could, as she keeps saying, there were signs. There were signs. And she could see the signs, but the daughter didn't see the signs, and the daughter didn't want to know. And so here she is kind of feeling guilty, thinking maybe the daughter blames her for having seen what was going to happen or had some premonition of how this was all going to work out. So, of course, now I've got to go and establish a really, really strong motivation now for where this character, the mother, gets this deep anxiety about wanting to protect someone from suffering, and also where her experience of having anxiety about people disappearing in her life comes from. Because, in a way, those are really her two very strong motivating factors. And that is also what allows our readers to deeply connect with her, is we get a sense of the kind of inner workings of her heart, of her desire. It makes her sympathetic when we understand. Whenever, we always say that, all you need to do is hear somebody's story, and your judgment of them will fall away. We judge people. We have more compassion for people when we know the path that they've walked, when we've walked in their shoes. Now, backstory allows our reader to walk in the shoes of our character. And that is what allows them to be sympathetic, even if the character's not a very nice or sympathetic person. That vulnerability, that sense of vulnerability that we've actually all had a lot, we've all suffered. And that suffering, though the circumstances might be different, the little circumstances of it all might be slightly different, we've all experienced fear and loss and loneliness and abandonment and rejection and regret and all of those things. So what we've got to do is we've got to open these little apertures for our readers all the time into this, the inner psyche, the inner workings of our character, so that the reader cares. That's the most important thing. If you have readers, if the reader's reading something, the reader doesn't care, kind of lost the plot. It doesn't matter what your plot is, right? If the reader actually doesn't care about your main character. So backstory's got to be handled very carefully, and though we talk about backstory as being something that you weave in a way, I think backstory is not so much woven in, but saturated in everything that our character says, does. Everything that they do is influenced by their backstory, because our backstory, the things that have happened to us in our past, basically form us. we're constructed around the things that happen in our past. We're made by them. So who we are is more than just influenced, it's kind of shaped. It's completely made from the stuff of our past. So, you know, if you've experienced love as a child, we even know that these things are like really, like from early on. If you've experienced unconditional love as a really, really small child, that forms you. If that is lacking, that forms you. If you've had a kind of a big betrayal in your early childhood, in your teenage years, it shapes the way you go forward in life. It shapes your intimacy. It shapes the way your expectations of the world, the expectations of yourself, whether you will be somebody who will set a goal and achieve it, whether you'll be somebody who will constantly doubt yourself, whether you'll be somebody who trusts the world, has faith, or somebody who constantly fears the world. And so understanding, you know, that part of our character is more than just, you know, like nice to have and a kind of nice few little chapters that we can throw in to help our reader along, you know. For the writer, for me, I absolutely need to know what those bits and pieces of my character's past are so that I can create a really credible character moving forward and allow my reader to walk in her shoes. So I've been thinking a lot about this idea of disappearance and what happens to, you know, when people we love start to disappear. And it doesn't necessarily mean even physically disappear. Emotional disappearance is as traumatic for a child if a parent or somebody they love emotionally disappears through illness or something else. That is huge, huge, huge for a child. There's that sense of complete, you know, a kind of an ambiguous loss, maybe because the person is physically there, but they're emotionally not there. And that could come through a mental illness, it could come through a physical illness, it could come through an addiction, it could come through anything like that. So today I'm sort of playing with this idea of who in her life disappeared early on, where she started to and also in addition, because this is one of my character's little sub-themes, there were signs. It's like you could tell that this was going to happen, but at the same time, you're not able to actually stop this thing from happening. And that, of course, leads to a sense of powerlessness, but also that kind of delusion of omnipotence that you could have prevented something from happening. I think a lot of us take responsibility for things that happened maybe when we were children, maybe our parents getting divorced or something like that happening, where you think, what did I do to cause that, or how could I have prevented that? And that, you know, really allows us to feel that. I think all of us know that feeling of taking responsibility for things or misunderstanding something or misunderstanding our role in something. As children, there are so many of these tragic misunderstandings. We connect things that are not connected. We take responsibility for things that are not ours to take responsibility for. And that is, of course, the absolute pure innocence of a child, trying to connect the dots, trying to make sense of a world that does not make sense, and trying to make sense of a world that is an adult world. When you're a child, making sense of the adult world is like a full-time job, and we make all these, we start connecting dots that are not ours to connect, but then we sort of live with all these connected dots, these like synapses in our brains that are all connected. So I'm working on what disappeared for my main character early on. Was it a parent that fell into an addiction? Was it a father who became depressed? Was it was it something? I'm trying to work out what that was, but there must have been. I need to give her something that has caused this synaptic constellation inside of her that makes her so terrified of people she loves disappearing. And then I've actually already written the scene of when she was 19, which is the same age that her daughter is now, where she had this friendship with a woman which was like the friendship. You remember the friendship of your whole life. It was like, oh my God, I've never had a friendship like this. There never will be a friendship like this. And it at that age, it kind of plays on the borders of a sexual attraction, but in this particular case, it wasn't a sexual attraction. It's more it was more a kind of a big love, like a big love, a bigger love than she'd ever had for anyone in her whole life, a connection she'd never felt, a soul connection, that kind of sister bond that you have with somebody that is so utterly, it almost like there's no kind of language even for it. It was so intense and so beautiful, and it made her feel so alive. The way that you can only feel alive when you're 19 and you imagine that, life is just going to be this honeymoon ahead of you. And here you are in this kind of, almost this like romance of friendship, and it couldn't get better. And then of course, that friendship suddenly disappears. It just like dissolves into nothing. And that's based on an experience I had when I was 19 with somebody that was just in that realm, and suddenly she just disappeared. So I'm going to use that. I'm borrowing. You always have to borrow your own memories and give them to your character. Let your character have them, change them, use them, massage them, create them anew, so that your character can have them for herself. But draw on the emotion, because that's always what we're trying to, it's like the bone marrow of your memory. You want to suck out the bone marrow of the emotion and put it into your character's memories, so that your character can live that moment and have that moment for herself. But when you're writing, of course, that space. You've been inside that space, right? And so for me, that's what I'm going to work on today. I'm going to try and work into these backstories. And I just had another thought about, motherhood. And when you're writing, you're always thinking about the vision of life that story is in service to, what it is you're actually saying about the human condition, what it is that your story is saying about the human condition. And I guess for me, it's always, you keep working it until you feel like you've got the texture of it quite right. You can keep working it right up until, the end of the writing. But for me, it's about the fact that as a mother, you have to allow your children to go out into the world. You can't protect them, obviously. You can't protect them. You do what you can, but this idea that you can protect your children from anything in the world, it is an omnipotent fantasy, and unless you have a grip on that, it's going to be ugly, really ugly. And so the thing about being a mother is you've got to have faith that you're putting your children out into the world, that they're going to be okay. You've got to go let them travel. You've got to go let them drive. You've got to go let them be in that relationship that you think is really, where it's going, but you've got to go and let them have it. And you just have to have faith that they will be okay. And either your faith will be rewarded and they will be okay, or your faith will be shattered. And if that happens, you have to have faith that you will be okay. So motherhood, if you think about it, is predicated entirely on this thing we call faith, which we have no evidence. It's like, it's hope. It's just this optimism that the heart has, that things are going to actually be okay. It's going to work out for the best, right? Of course, sometimes that happens and sometimes that doesn't happen. Can we live with that? Can we live with that? And I think that is the question at the heart of my book. Can we live with that? It's the book's title at the moment is All the Things We Cannot Keep. And there are many things that we cannot keep. But can we keep that truth that it might be okay and it might not be okay, and however that works out, we'll get through it. So that's all that's going on in my head today. I hope that you have a fantastic Friday yourself, and if you are working on something, I hope you get little bit of writing time, a little bit of reflection time, a little bit of thinking time. And I'll see you again next Friday.